Imagine if the story humanity has carefully preserved for nearly 2 millennia turned out to be incomplete. What if, beneath centuries of doctrinal layers and persistent silence, a forbidden truth lies hidden, a truth so explosive it could shake the very foundations of faith, topple established thrones, and challenge the unquestionable authority of religious institutions? This seemingly simple question echoes thunderously through the quiet halls of history. What if Jesus of Nazareth left behind daughters? Not symbolic figures or allegories, but daughters of flesh and blood, born into a world perhaps entirely unprepared to acknowledge them, heirs in whose veins flowed both human mortality and the breath of the divine. For a moment, just imagine what such a stunning truth would mean. Faith, as it is known today, was shaped not only by carefully preserved memories, but perhaps even more profoundly, by what was deliberately erased from collective memory. In the long corridors of ancient cathedrals and at closed synods, the story of Christ was relentlessly narrowed, pruned, and meticulously sculpted until it assumed the form we unmistakably recognize. Every inconvenient fragment, every potential mention of a personal life or family, was quietly buried beneath layers of dogma and theological interpretation. Yet, the whispers persist, seeping through the cracks of forbidden texts, through the enigmatic fields of apocryphal gospels, through hidden symbols in ancient art, and through centuries-old legends. They are whispers of a bloodline belonging not just to kings or prophets, but to daughters, hidden children whose very existence threatened to irrevocably shift the balance of power and spiritual authority as it had been established. Why daughters? Why not sons? In an ancient world steeped in patriarchal norms, a daughter could be both invisible and an unstoppable force. Her name could be erased from official records, her face absent from solemn chronicles. Yet it was through her womb that a bloodline could continue without visible interruption, a hidden thread, silently weaving itself into the fabric of history, a secret legacy impossible to destroy, even when her name was struck from the pages of memory. Some researchers suggest this is precisely why the early church harbored such profound fear of this idea. To acknowledge the existence of Jesus' daughters would mean admitting that his divine authority was not limited to scripture or sacred sacraments, but continued to live in the flesh, walking among humanity, passed down in the veins of women who could not be fully controlled or subjugated. And so, if they truly existed, these daughters had to be erased from history. Erased not only by violence, but far more effectively, by silence. The most potent form of oblivion is not physical destruction, but complete suppression. Remove their names, omit their stories, sow doubt about their possibility, and soon the world would forget them entirely. But human memory never truly vanishes. Here and there, a subtle trace remains, an image skillfully carved in stone, a story whispered among those once branded as heretics, a symbol delicately etched into the folds of a Madonna's robe or in the hidden corners of frescoes. Each clue is fragile and easily disputed. Each fragment provokes debate and skepticism. Yet together they form the outline of a story that stubbornly refuses to dissolve into the silence of ages. Could it be that the true Holy Grail was never a golden chalice, but rather the bloodline of daughters? Could it be that even now, somewhere in the forgotten genealogies of European aristocratic houses, in the blood of ancient dynasties, or in the lives of those who never even suspected the grandeur of their heritage, the daughters of Christ continue their journey? No one can say with absolute certainty, but today we invite you to follow this whisper into the shadowed places where memory and myth are intimately intertwined, where history bends into an enigmatic mystery, and where the central question still awaits its answer beneath centuries of silence. What if the greatest secret was not that Christ lived, but that his daughters survived? Before we continue our fascinating investigation, please take a few seconds to support this channel, subscribe so you don't miss new videos, and hit the like button, as it's crucial for the promotion and growth of our community. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We're very interested to know the geography of our like-minded viewers. And please watch this video until the very end, as the final section will present key conclusions that tie all the threads together. Links to our other engaging videos can be found in the description. So if Christ truly left a family, where did they disappear to? History, as is well known, is written by those who hold power, and power often prefers to forget what does not serve its interests or undermines its authority. A direct lineage from Jesus, especially one passed through daughters, would have posed an enormous threat to the early church. Its authority was founded on the strict idea that salvation and spiritual grace could flow only through a hierarchy of priests, bishops, and ultimately, popes. But a living bloodline was something they could not control. A living heir would not need Rome's permission to claim spiritual or even temporal authority. Their very existence would openly challenge the Church's monopoly on interpreting divine will. Imagine a woman, a daughter of Christ, standing in a central city square, her very presence an undeniable refutation of the entire power structure built in his name. Her blood would be her own gospel, her body a living vessel of an unbreakable covenant. And so the pressing question arises, if they existed, what happened to them? Some ancient traditions whisper of exile. The family, perhaps, was secretly taken from the Holy Land, ferried across seas by loyal followers who recognized that Jerusalem was no longer a safe haven. Likely, they vanished into obscurity in distant lands. Their names were changed, their story meticulously silenced, until the world eventually forgot who they truly were. But oblivion, as we've said, is never complete. Just as a receding tide leaves behind fragments of shells and sea treasures on the sand, so too does history leave subtle yet precious fragments of truth. Apocryphal Gospels, those texts branded as heretical and carefully hidden from the wider public, sometimes contain subtle hints of a lineage quietly continuing through unnamed figures. These lines are like faint trails, erased repeatedly over centuries, yet still visible to those who know how to look and interpret the hidden signs. And in the medieval world, this idea resurfaced in whispers and coded messages. Grail legends speak not only of mystical chalices and patens, but also of bloodlines, of sang-real royal blood. Some scholars, like Henry Lincoln, Richard Lee, and Michael Bagent in their famous research Holy Blood, Holy Grail, 1982, and subsequent works, suggest that this was never a search for a physical object, but rather a search for a family, a line of descendants so meticulously hidden that only symbols and allegories could reveal it. Why then would this line have vanished so completely and without a trace? The quiet legacy. In the ancient Mediterranean, lineage was of paramount importance. Monarchs asserted their right to the throne by birthright. Clerics traced their origins to prophets, and the fates of dynasties depended on the strength of their blood ties. The idea that Jesus might have left daughters would mean his divine legacy did not end on the cross. It would have continued in blood, in bodies, in the hidden veins of future generations. For the church hierarchy, this was unacceptable. Their claim was to be the sole channel of divine authority. A living bloodline, however, would bypass all these claims. No priest, no bishop, no pope could ever compete with the authority of one who carried the same blood as Christ himself. Thus, this potential history was erased. Church councils decisively rejected any texts that hinted at Christ's human nature, his family ties, or possible heirs. These writings were declared heresy, their creators persecuted, and their communities destroyed. The daughters, if they truly existed, vanished into the shadows of time. Yet even shadows leave faint outlines. What if their descendants became unregistered consorts of kings, silent mothers of noble dynasties? What if their names survived not as daughters of Christ, but as forgotten figures buried in the vast genealogies of Europe? Their secret was passed down from generation to generation in profound silence. The disappearance of a lineage is not proof of its absence. On the contrary, it may be the greatest evidence of its existence. For what could be a more powerful force than a truth so dangerous it had to be completely erased from history? And so, we are left with only a faint whisper. Perhaps Christ's bloodline was never destroyed. Perhaps it was simply meticulously hidden, waiting for the moment when the world would rediscover what was once strictly forbidden. If there is any figure in the New Testament that lurks like a shadow on the edge of mystery, it is Mary Magdalene. For some, she was a repentant sinner, a woman rescued from spiritual darkness by Christ's grace. For others, she appeared as the apostle to the apostles, entrusted with the first revelation of the resurrection itself. But beyond these contradictory images lies another role, whispered in heretical texts, hinted at in ancient legends, and perhaps too dangerous for the Church to permit, the role of a consort, a mother, and the guardian of a sacred bloodline. The canonical Gospels offer little information about Magdalene. They reduce her to a follower, a witness, a secondary figure whose significance briefly flares at the tomb before fading once more. But the Gospels that were rejected, the apocrypha, speak with an entirely different voice. In the Gospel of Philip, a text buried for centuries until its rediscovery at Nag Hammadi, Magdalene is described not merely as a disciple, but as the one Christ loved more than all others, the one he often kissed. It is said that the other apostles felt jealous of her extraordinary intimacy with him. Some scholars interpret this as a metaphor, indicating spiritual closeness. But others raise a question the Church never wished to utter aloud. Was it something more? If Christ and Magdalene were bound in a sacred union, then she may have been not merely a witness to his life, but a vessel of his continuation, a mother carrying the future of his bloodline in her womb. This possibility radically redefines all established notions. For centuries, Magdalene was depicted either as a sinner or a saint, but very rarely as a partner. The role of a wife would have made her a central figure in this narrative, the very axis around which his legacy could have revolved. And if she bore his children, if she bore his daughters, then her erasure from history was not merely an act of misogyny. It was an urgent necessity. Just imagine how different the world would look if her story had been preserved. Imagine a Christianity that revered not only the divine masculine, but also the divine feminine. embodied in the union of Christ and Magdalene, passed down to daughters who would represent both the continuation of his blood and the sacred power of womanhood. But history took a different path. Instead, Magdalene was reinterpreted as a repentant prostitute, a figure of shame rather than power. This image, though never mentioned in the Bible itself, was actively preached by Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th century and became firmly entrenched in Christian tradition. With one sermon, her potential role as partner and mother was buried beneath centuries of stigma and prejudice. Yet, she never entirely disappeared. In the south of France, legends tell of a woman arriving by boat, carrying whispers of holiness. She is said to have lived in the caves of Provence, weeping and praying until her death. But some versions of the story add a detail the Church preferred to omit. She did not come alone. She came with a child, a daughter, perhaps even more than one. If this is true, then Mary Magdalene's role was not merely to witness the resurrection. It was to carry forward the very life of Christ, hidden in the veins of her children. Perhaps the Church buried her story, but in the hills of France, in the symbols of the Black Madonna, and in the coded legends of the Grail, the secret survived. Was she a sinner, a saint, or the mother of a hidden bloodline? Perhaps she was all of these at once, woven into a story too dangerous to survive the pen of history, yet too powerful to be forgotten. If Magdalene's role was so central in early Christian traditions, why do official records maintain such profound silence on the matter? Perhaps the answer lies not so much in what was written, but in what was deliberately left unwritten. The early Church was by no means a neutral custodian of historical memory. On the contrary, it was an emerging institution, actively building its power structures, shaping doctrinal foundations, and deciding who would be revered for centuries and who would be consigned to oblivion. Silence became its most potent and effective weapon. In the first centuries after Christ's departure, Christian communities were diverse and often fragmented, frequently in deep disagreement. Some firmly adhered to the image of a purely spiritual Christ, a divine being untouched by earthly needs of the flesh. Others, conversely, emphasized his human essence, his blood ties, and family connections. Within these competing theological visions, the possibility that Christ could be a husband and father was by no means improbable. It was merely one of many stories actively circulating in the cultural landscape of the ancient Mediterranean. However, as the Church began to consolidate its position and centralize power, such traditions came to be seen as a direct threat. At historical councils, such as Nicaea, in 325 CE, where bishops gathered by imperial decree to determine the future of Christianity, uniformity and consensus were valued significantly above literal truth. Texts contradicting the chosen official narrative were condemned. Writings that spoke too much of Magdalene, too openly hinting at hidden heirs, were ruthlessly declared heretical and decisively rejected. By suppressing the very possibility of Christ's family, the Church thereby guaranteed something crucially important for itself: absolute exclusivity. Power could by no means reside in the hands of unseen and therefore uncontrollable female figures, potential heiresses. It had to flow exclusively through bishops, popes, and priests, men consecrated to mediate between heaven and earth. Nevertheless, this silence was not perfect. Here and there, faint but persistent echoes remained. The Gospel of Mary, an ancient text discovered in a papyrus codex, depicts Magdalene as a bearer and teacher of hidden wisdom, one who comforts and supports the disciples after the crucifixion. Her lips utter words imbued with undeniable authority. However, Peter vehemently disputes her authority, insisting that Christ could not have revealed such profound truths to a woman. The text breaks off mid-sentence, inevitably making us wonder what else was excised from it. What else might have been said about her true role? This silence was by no means a mere accident. It was a carefully devised strategy. To destroy such a potentially dangerous truth, it is not enough to simply deny its existence. It must be replaced with something else. And so, Magdalene's image was radically reinterpreted and redefined. No longer a teacher of secret wisdom, no longer a possible partner of Christ, she became a repentant sinner. Her name was henceforth inextricably linked with the stigma of shame. This silence, emanating from the church hierarchy, was deafening. Yet the more fiercely this silence was enforced, the more curious and telling its gaps became. Why was so much effort invested in erasure? Why such persistence in promoting one single version of her story? Could it be that this very persistent silence serves as undeniable proof that the truth was not merely forgotten, but deliberately hidden from view? Within monastery walls, perhaps a faint whisper was passed down. In remote villages, legends might have been passed by word of mouth around blazing hearths, and in symbols skillfully carved in stone, painted on ancient frescoes, and mysteriously whispered in secret societies, the audacious possibility of Christ's daughters lived on, preserved, awaiting the day when Rome's silence would finally be broken. For silence cannot last forever. It can conceal, suppress, and bury, but it can never entirely destroy. Somewhere beneath the thick layer of forgotten writings and the immense weight of established dogmas, the story of Christ's hidden bloodline still awaits its moment, lurking in the depths. If Rome sought to silence this story, where can we still hear its faint echoes? In the apocrypha, in the Gospels that were decisively discarded, branded as heretical and carefully hidden. These are voices that broke through the inevitable cracks in the monolith of orthodoxy, fragile yet persistent, whispering of possibilities the Church dared not include in its canonical corpus. The Gospel of Mary is one such unique text. In it, Magdalene appears not merely as an ordinary follower, but as one who offers comfort and guidance to the other disciples. Peter actively resists her evident authority, questioning, "Did he truly speak with a woman in private and not openly with us?" Her role here is that of a leader endowed with profound closeness, an undeniable intimacy that transparently hints at something far deeper than ordinary student-teacher relations. The Gospel of Philip goes even further in its revelations. It describes Magdalene as Christ's companion, a beloved who stood above all others. The text explicitly states that he often kissed her on the mouth and mentions the overt jealousy of the apostles, who wondered why she received such exceptional favor. Was this a purely spiritual manifestation? Perhaps. But why then the jealousy? Why such persistent assertion that she, specifically, was granted revelations that others did not receive? These texts do not name daughters directly, but in the gaps, in the persistent silences, in the artful metaphors, some researchers hear a subtle but distinct hint of a family's existence. If Magdalene was a companion, if she was beloved above all others, then it is entirely possible that she could also have been a mother. The very word companion in its original language carries deep meanings of closeness, equal partnership, and even a full marital bond. Other apocryphal works, the Acts of Philip, the Gospel of the Hebrews, Pistis Sophia, speak in allegories and fragmented pieces, but invariably elevate Magdalene's image, always hinting at an intimacy that proved impossible to completely erase from historical memory. However, the most striking and resonant echo lies not in what these texts explicitly say, but in what they refuse to say. Why do these writings so persistently and fervently defend Magdalene's authority? Why do they portray her as the chosen one, entrusted with profound secrets that others could not bear? Could it be that they are merely shadows of a much vaster and deeper truth? That she was the bearer not only of sacred teachings, but, perhaps, of children? Apocryphal texts posed a potential threat precisely because they allowed for a completely different implication. In their lines, they carefully preserved Magdalene's image, presenting her not merely as a disciple, but as a key, deeply trusted, and authoritative figure within the Savior's circle. And if one acknowledged that she was the Messiah's faithful companion, a woman he loved more than all his other followers, then a deeply unsettling question inevitably arose. Could these two have been bound in marriage? Had children together, that is, possessed their own family? Such a supposition was absolutely unacceptable to the nascent Christian church of that era. For this reason, apocryphal writings were ruthlessly consigned to oblivion and destruction. Their manuscripts were meticulously hidden in desolate desert caves, and texts that fell into the hands of authorities were publicly burned in city squares. Communities daring to cherish these forbidden insights were branded as heretical and ruthlessly annihilated in the crucible of brutal persecutions. Absolute silence, however, is known to be impossible. In 1945, the world witnessed a monumental event, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi codices, joined in subsequent years by the Dead Sea Scrolls. These discoveries flung open doors that had remained securely bolted for centuries. Suddenly, as if from the depths of ages, a faint whisper was heard once more. Previously hidden voices spoke again, narrating Magdalene's exceptional role, her extraordinary closeness to Christ, and her undeniable authority among his followers. And invariably, like a shadow, the unresolved question lingered. Did she leave the world something more than just spiritual teachings? Could she have had daughters, continuators not only of her faith, but also of her bloodline? While the apocryphal texts themselves do not provide a direct and unambiguous answer to these pressing questions, in their surviving fragments, in their fragmentary lines, and on their irrevocably lost pages, they leave enough pregnant silence to prompt us to reflect. They provide ample space for human imagination, allowing it to be filled with possibilities and scenarios that the official church once dared not preserve for posterity. Perhaps their very absence, their incompleteness, serves as a kind of echo of past events. Perhaps the greatest proof of all is not the information directly recorded in the Scriptures, but rather what was deliberately and meticulously erased from historical memory. If we assume that Mary Magdalene was indeed the guardian of Jesus Christ's bloodline, then the question naturally arises, where might her path have led? The Holy Land, constantly shaken by internecine conflicts and subject to brutal persecutions, could under no circumstances have provided safety for a woman, let alone her offspring. For this reason, numerous legends tell of her escape, of a grand sea voyage that carried her away from the walls of Jerusalem to the rugged yet hospitable shores of southern Gaul. This astonishing story is still whispered in picturesque Provence, where some villages and settlements have preserved echoes of her name in their titles. In the coastal town of Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer, the legend persists of a small boat, devoid of sails and oars, which, according to tradition, carried Mary Magdalene, her faithful companions, and, in some versions, an infant. Outcasts and left to the mercy of the waves, they are said to have reached the salt marshes of southern France, a place that was both desolate and deeply sacred, an ideal refuge where exiles could vanish into obscurity, hidden from their persecutors. It is here, in this unique corner of the world, that her unseen presence is felt in the stones of ancient buildings and in every line of local history. The Saint-Baume grotto, nestled high in the picturesque mountains, has long been revered as the very sanctuary where she spent her final years. Pilgrims from around the world still ascend its winding, rocky path today, whispering prayers in the sacred silence of a place where, according to tradition, she offered her supplications and shed tears. But what truly were her tears about? Deep repentance, as the Church traditionally teaches, or the unbearable burden of a secret so significant it could not be spoken aloud? Local tradition persistently asserts that she did not arrive here entirely alone. She was accompanied by sisters in faith, loyal companions, and perhaps someone else whose presence remained in the shadows. Some sources directly indicate that she carried a daughter with her, her child by Christ, whose descendants are believed to have eventually mingled with the ancient and noble families of southern France, their sacred lineage remaining hidden in plain sight among the esteemed lords and ladies of the region. In this particular landscape, historical memory is remarkably embedded in various symbols. Thus, the Black Madonnas of Provence, enigmatic statues of dark-skinned mothers with infants, have been linked by some researchers specifically to Magdalene. Their hidden message, perhaps, is a subtle reminder of the mother who carried precious, sacred blood into distant exile. But why did France become her refuge? Perhaps it's because ancient Gaul was significantly distant from the power center of Rome, representing a remote frontier where exiles could find peace and live, avoiding constant surveillance and persecution. Or perhaps potential allies were already there, communities that showed deep sympathy for her presence, her unique message, and possibly her mysterious lineage. It is also possible that this land, located on the very edge of a great empire, was destined to become the cradle for an entirely new dynasty, hidden from public view. Legends possess astonishing tenacity, for they never completely disappear from collective memory. Throughout Provence, majestic churches dedicated to Magdalene's veneration still stand. Annual festivals reverently commemorate her arrival by sea. And invariably, amidst these solemn celebrations, the unresolved question lingers. Was she merely a saint who repented in solitude, or was she a mother who brought with her the daughters of Christ, whose true essence remained hidden beneath a dense veil of myth? Exile, at its core, represents something more than mere flight from persecution. It is, first and foremost, an act of preservation. By hiding in the wild, untouched hills of France, Magdalene and her progeny, if they indeed existed, ensured that a precious bloodline would not be irrevocably lost in the chaos and violence of a fractured Jerusalem. This lineage would have continued quietly and discreetly in the picturesque valleys of Europe, subtly weaving itself into the complex tapestry of ordinary families who, perhaps, never fully grasped the grandeur and weight of the heritage they carried. This is how this ancient whisper is preserved. The south of France proved to be more than just a temporary refuge for her. It became the true cradle of a legacy that even the most powerful church could not definitively erase from history. If we accept the hypothesis that Mary Magdalene indeed carried Christ's bloodline into distant exile, what tangible reminders might she have left behind? In ancient churches and small chapels across France, Spain, and Italy, enigmatic statues still stand, widely known as Black Madonnas. These dark-skinned effigies of the Virgin and Child, adorned in rich gold and mysterious shadowed robes, gaze upon the world with stern yet surprisingly gentle eyes. For centuries, they have been objects of profound veneration, attracting countless pilgrims who knelt before them and lit candles at their feet. But what if their true meaning extends far beyond a simple depiction of the Virgin Mary? Some researchers and adherents of alternative theories are convinced that these mysterious figures harbor an entirely different, meticulously hidden history. Their distinctive darkness, it is asserted, is not merely a coincidental artistic choice or the result of centuries of candle smoke. It is, rather, a profound symbol, a veiled reference to Mary Magdalene and her supposed secret role as mother and guardian of a sacred bloodline. In stark contrast to the pale and ethereal Madonna images so characteristic of the Renaissance, Black Madonnas appear firmly rooted in the very earth. Their presence seems primal, almost predating Christianity itself, possessing a deep, archaic power. What if their true purpose was to subtly remind the faithful of a fundamental truth that the official church so diligently sought to erase from public consciousness, that Christ's legacy continued not only through spirit and sacred sacraments, but also through the womb of a woman who, perhaps, bore his children, thereby ensuring the continuation of his earthly line? In picturesque Provence, a region traditionally believed to be Magdalene's final refuge, these mysterious statues are found with particular frequency. For centuries, devout pilgrims have attributed to them an extraordinary ability to perform miracles, grant healings, and provide reliable protection, as if the figures of women, etched in stone or wood, possessed some hidden energy passed down through generations. The logical question arises: is this mysterious power not an echo of memories of a hidden and carefully guarded bloodline? Furthermore, the image of the Black Madonna deeply symbolizes the sacred feminine, which has long been systematically suppressed within Western religious tradition. Her very existence subtly whispers of long-past eras when the divine was perceived not exclusively as a father figure or an almighty king, but also as a nurturing mother, a fertile womb, the source of life. Perhaps the very placement of these figures at the heart of Christian worship represented a silent gesture of defiance, a sophisticated method of preserving truths that, for various reasons, could not be openly stated or proclaimed. An unchanging element of these effigies is the figure of the child, always held by the Madonna, and the identity of this infant may not be as unambiguous as it first appears. While official church doctrine adamantly asserts that every Madonna and child sculpture symbolizes the Virgin Mary and the infant Jesus Christ. Other hypotheses allow for a completely different interpretation. According to these alternative views, in some cases, the child may represent Christ's descendants, daughters born of Magdalene. Thus, these statues may encode not a single story, but two parallel narratives: the story of a virgin who gave birth to God, and the story of a companion who brought forth his heirs. A reasonable question arises: why are these Madonnas depicted as black? Some researchers are convinced that their dark hue serves as a link to much older pagan traditions, to images of goddesses from Egypt and the Middle East, whose effigies often had a dark color, symbolizing fertility, hidden mystery, and the life-giving soil of the earth. Others see it as an intentional veil, a clever way to conceal the truth while leaving it in plain sight. Perhaps depicting Magdalene as a black Madonna was a kind of code, a symbol understood only by the few initiated into the legend of her exile and subsequent life. The official church, though tolerating the presence of these unusual images, clearly does so with considerable difficulty and internal struggle. For many centuries, prominent theologians and church hierarchs engaged in heated debates regarding their true meaning, often relegating them to mere curiosities or offering rational explanations for their origin so as to neutralize any potential heresy. Yet, despite these official interpretations, ordinary believers continue to light candles at the foot of these statues, offer heartfelt prayers at their feet, and carry with them a steadfast conviction that these mysterious figures symbolize something far deeper and more significant than what official church doctrine permits. Thus, the Black Madonnas continue to stand in their places, silent and vigilant guardians of a secret that stubbornly refuses to fade into oblivion. They stand like somber witnesses embodied in stone and wood, possibly serving as a constant reminder that Christ's supposed daughters were never completely erased from history. Their existence, according to this version, was merely meticulously concealed within complex symbols over which the Church, it seems, had no full control. If the premise that Magdalene indeed brought a bloodline to France is true, then the question inevitably arises: who ensured its subsequent survival in a foreign land? Exile alone, certainly, could not have been sufficient to preserve such a vulnerable legacy. A mother and her daughters, even if they found refuge in remote caves or under the unspoken protection of loyal followers, would still have needed reliable and constant guardianship. This is why ancient legends recount the existence of a host of guardians, local dynasties, influential noble families, and secret allies who, it is believed, adopted this lineage into their own, gradually and subtly weaving the sacred blood into the very fabric of European history and aristocracy. In the rugged yet picturesque hills of Occitania, a region where the powerful Cathar movement once flourished, faint whispers still circulate about certain families who meticulously traced their ancestry back to Magdalene's closest companions. These noble lords and ladies, often in open or covert opposition to powerful Rome, seemed destined by fate itself to preserve a profound secret capable of shaking the very foundations of official church doctrine. In this context, a piercing question arises: were they merely ordinary rebels challenging the status quo, or were they true guardians of some sacred heritage? Such a concept, upon closer inspection, does not seem so far-fetched at all. In a world where social power and status were measured primarily through lineages and genealogical connections, the most reliable and strategically sound way to ensure the protection of Christ's descendants would have been to merge them with influential noble houses. Thus, in carefully crafted marriage contracts and ancient genealogical scrolls, divine blood could be cleverly hidden from prying eyes, yet reliably preserved for future generations. What was initially perceived as a painful exile could, after just a few generations, transform into significant political and social influence. The royal courts of Europe, according to this version, could have subtly carried Christ's blood, never speaking of it aloud, but sensing its unseen presence. Such a bold hypothesis inevitably raises a series of very unsettling and profound questions. Could the kings and queens of medieval Europe, without knowing it, have been heirs to a mysterious bloodline that perhaps originated in distant Galilee? Were the lavish coronation ceremonies, accompanied by solemn prayers for the granting of divine right to the throne, actually rooted in something far more ancient and sacred? In such a case, we are talking about a hidden inheritance that conferred legitimacy and authority not through papal blessing or ecclesiastical approval, but solely through the right of birth itself. Certain ancient traditions persistently point to the Merovingian dynasty, the legendary long-haired kings of the Franks, whose rule spanned the 5th to 8th centuries. These monarchs were rumored to possess a mystical power, astonishing healing abilities, and a special aura of divine right that, it was believed, no pope could bestow. In light of the theory under consideration, an intriguing question arises. Could their extraordinary power have stemmed not from ordinary legends and tales, but from a real blood connection? Perhaps we are talking about blood that was passed down from generation to generation, starting from Magdalene and her daughters, and ultimately flowed into their royal line. If this hypothesis is true, then their dynasty held not merely political significance, it was truly sacred in nature. Their power stemmed not from ecclesiastical institutions, but directly from the blood of Christ. Such an explanation would shed light on many historical mysteries. It explains why the Merovingians so stubbornly resisted Rome's dominance, why their legitimacy seemed unshakable, and why their ultimate downfall occurred not by the will of their people, but as a result of betrayal and artful manipulation by the papacy and competing dynasties. Chroniclers of the time often hinted at their unusual origins. For example, the legend of King Merovech, whose name gave the dynasty its title, tells of his miraculous birth. It was said that his mother, while bathing in the sea, was visited by a mysterious creature, and soon after, Merovech was born. Historians tend to dismiss this story as a myth. However, perhaps it was merely an encrypted code, an allegory for a bloodline that could not be openly acknowledged. If the Merovingians truly carried the blood of the daughters, then their lineage would be the closest to Christ's dynasty ever to exist in Europe. Their thrones would have become altars, and their crowns symbols not only of political power, but of divine heritage. It is no wonder that Rome so persistently sought their overthrow. By the 8th century, the Merovingians were replaced by the Carolingians. Their legacy gradually faded, and their bloodline was presumed to have been severed. However, rumors continued to circulate. Some whispered that their heirs secretly survived, and their lineage was preserved through marriages with noble families, quietly passed down from generation to generation over centuries. And always, in the background, the question remained. Were the Merovingians merely kings from ancient legends, or did they represent something far greater? Were they a hidden continuation of a story the Church relentlessly tried to erase from memory, the daughters of Christ, woven into the very roots of Europe's royal houses? The answer to this question remains shrouded in deep silence. But perhaps the very persistence of this legend serves as sufficient proof. For why else would the memory of the Merovingians carry such an unsettling resonance, if not because they harbored the whisper of a forbidden legacy? What if the Holy Grail was never an ordinary chalice? Legends tell of knights embarking on a quest for a cup, a vessel that caught Christ's blood during the crucifixion, or the chalice from which he drank at the Last Supper. But some researchers contend that this story is merely a veil, a clever disguise for something far more mysterious. The true Grail, they propose, was not a material object, but a bloodline, not a relic of stone or gold, but the womb of a woman who bore his heirs. The phrase sang real, often translated as Holy Grail, may once have meant sang royal, royal blood. Over many centuries, the meaning of this expression gradually blurred, shifting from the idea of a bloodline to a cup, from a woman to a chalice. But if one looks to the earliest whispers, the Grail may have been Mary Magdalene herself, the sacred vessel who bore Christ's children in exile. And if so, the quest for the Grail was never a chase for an artifact. It was about preserving a family, protecting daughters whose blood carried both human fragility and divine heritage. Such a reinterpretation lends a disturbing and profound meaning to medieval romances. Recall the knights who journeyed through forests and desolate lands in search of the Grail, their trials, their secrecy, their unwavering devotion. Was this not the work of preservation and guardianship? Were they not guardians of a hidden truth, seeking not an object, but living heirs who carried the mystery of the Incarnation itself? And what about the Grail's connection to healing? In every tale, the discovery of the Grail signifies the restoration of life, the healing of the land, the mending of what was broken. Could this be a symbol of a bloodline? The idea that in the daughters lay not only the continuation of Christ, but also the potential to renew the world, to restore the long-suppressed balance of the divine feminine and masculine. The notion of the Grail as a material chalice always remains safe and convenient. It reduces this great mystery to a mere relic, an object that can be found, consecrated, and perhaps lost again. However, the Grail, understood as a womb, as a daughter, as a living, pulsating bloodline, takes on an entirely different, far more dangerous nature. For no existing church could accommodate such a stunning truth. No hierarchical structure would have the right to mediate its transmission or interpretation. If the Grail were flesh, then humanity's very salvation would lie beyond Rome's authority, in the hands of women who carried a lineage so sacred that its acknowledgement threatened to shatter established dogmas. Is it any wonder, then, that ancient legends underwent significant changes, that the Grail was rewritten and transformed into a chalice, a sacred vessel of stone, rather than the dangerous truth embodied in flesh? This transformation was necessary to securely hide the daughters. The story was meticulously rephrased, its profound meanings buried under layers of allegory, and its true symbols cleverly disguised. Yet despite all efforts, these symbols continue to whisper their stories: the chalice, the rose, a vessel shaped like a womb and carved into the walls of ancient cathedrals. The Grail Maiden appearing in old tales, offering a mysterious gift to a worthy knight. All of this, perhaps, is merely scattered fragments of a memory too vast and deep to be entirely erased. What if the true Grail was not merely a relic to be found, but in essence, a bloodline to be carefully guarded? And so when we utter the word Grail, perhaps we are not speaking of what we are accustomed to implying at all. Perhaps we are speaking of Magdalene, of her daughters, of a secret that managed to survive not in stone or sacred scriptures, but in living flesh and blood, cleverly hidden in plain sight. If the Grail represented not a chalice but a living bloodline, then how could this profound truth have been preserved over centuries? Certainly not through open declarations, for such assertions would have immediately led to accusations of heresy, exile, or even death. Instead, the story was likely encoded, woven into ancient manuscripts, illuminated in ambiguous symbols, and passed down in whispers through allegorical tales. The medieval world harbored a deep love for symbols, and scribes diligently copying texts often embedded hidden secrets within them, concealing forbidden truths beneath multiple layers of meaning. Some medieval codices contain very curious passages, verses that seem strangely placed, illustrations that appear superfluous, or patterns that repeat without obvious reason. To the uninitiated eye, these were mere embellishments, but for those initiated into the secrets, perhaps these served as signals, as signs that fragments of the story of Christ's daughters lay hidden within those pages. Take, for instance, the astonishing prevalence of rose and chalice imagery in high medieval manuscripts. The rose, with its petals spiraling inward, often served as a symbol of the sacred feminine. The chalice, womb-like in its form, acted as a vessel containing life. When scribes depicted them together, were they merely decorating the margins of manuscripts, or were they encoding a truth too dangerous to write openly? The truth being that Christ's bloodline continued through a woman and through her daughters, not yet recognized by the official church. Secret codes were not limited to manuscripts alone. They also manifested in architecture, in the very stones of great cathedrals, in Chartres, in Notre Dame, and in hidden chapels scattered across Europe. Stained glass windows and carved reliefs softly whisper of the divine feminine. Figures of Magdalene, often disguised as unnamed saints, gaze from windows, her presence simultaneously denied and immortalized. And then came the allegories. Medieval romances told of knights who embarked on quests for maidens, vessels, lost and rediscovered secrets. These tales could serve as coded narratives, preserving memory in an engaging story, rather than in strict scripture. For the common people, it was merely entertainment, but for those who knew, it was a method of preservation, a way to transmit a secret without ever uttering it aloud. The Codex served as both a book and a fortress. Words alone could not preserve such a dangerous truth. But hidden in ornament, in initial letters, in images of grapevines and roses, this truth allowed the discerning reader to catch a glimpse of what was strictly forbidden. Why even risk creating such codes? Because silence, though a powerful tool, cannot suppress memory forever. Those who believed in Christ's daughters could not allow this crucial story to vanish without a trace. They encoded it, hid it, wrapped it in allegories, trusting that someday someone would be able to decipher it again. And perhaps we are deciphering it even now. Every strange image in a medieval codex, every unexplained figure in a cathedral window, every story of maidens and vessels in romantic literature. All of these might be fragments of a hidden archive, a library of whispers, preserved not by words, but by ambiguous symbols. What if, all across Europe, we daily walk past undeniable evidence of Christ's daughters, carved in stone, painted on glass, hidden in ancient books, surviving centuries? What if the story was never destroyed, but merely meticulously veiled, waiting for us to read it anew? If the Grail represented not a chalice but a living bloodline, then what can be said about the children themselves? Legends from Languedoc, that strange and mysterious land in the south of France, speak in riddles of sisters, two young women whose origins are shrouded in profound silence. Their names are rarely mentioned, their faces never depicted. Yet these stories live on. Magdalene did not arrive in France alone. She came with daughters. In some tales, they appear as twins, mirror images of each other.